Alright, final checks. You're silent, windows are closed, music is playing, browsers are up. I think I'm good to go. Let's go ahead and get this started. Hello! Shadowcat back, and today we have a different-ish discussion. There's a lot of things to talk about today that I wanted to go through. And it's because of the news, things that are going on right now. It's because of things that I've heard other people talking about. We're going to be discussing things like civil war again. We're going to be discussing things like international conflict. We're going to be discussing the culture war currently underway across most of, Western civilization. We're going to be covering a lot of older topics, but I want to do so through kind of a different perspective than what I keep hearing through the majority of both the news and commentary community. So we're going to get into that. I have people in my chat, but I can't read it because I didn't make it big enough. There we go. Now I can read it. 250% increase in size. That works. Actually, just have my eyes checked. It's bad. Yeah, my eyes are awful. Well, No, I haven't become Scottish. Just bad eye. And only one of them, so super bad. But okay. Today's topic, I want to discuss war. And the reason that I want to discuss war today is because, once again, civil war is front and foremost in a lot of people's minds with the newest indictment of Donald Trump. Now, granted, this is not exactly new. People have been talking about this for years, even before they started trying to arrest Donald Trump every time a cloud floats across the sun. But it's becoming more and more of a prominent issue the more and more people see it. And what really drove me to make this video is I was actually watching Tim Pool. Because I do watch him. I disagree with a lot of things that he says, but I do think that he is actually a decently smart person, and he's at least up on the news. I get my news from Tim Pool roughly 24 hours before most anybody else covers it, because everybody else wants to take the time to process it, spin it, whatever. So that's what I follow him for. But the other day, and I don't have the episode pulled up, but the other day he was doing his nightly show, Timcast IRL. And he had two guests on. One of them was Michael Malice. And Michael Malice is just a treasure. He's fun no matter what situation you put him in. The other one he had on was Roseanne Barr, who was an actress. She was a TV personality, still is a TV personality, really. And since she's been fired from basically everything because of her views, she's just kind of now gotten into the whole culture war thing because it's kind of all she's got left at this point. And so they were talking about Trump indictments, they were talking politics, culture, things like this, and they had a segment in the middle. And I thought about bringing the segment in here to play for you, but it's a little on the long side, so I didn't want to just, grab a section of the podcast and just play it. But what happened was, there was a bit of an argument between the two guests, Michael Malice and Roseanne Barr, because Roseanne Barr specified that she doesn't think we're going to have elections in 2024. She's firmly under the belief that the entire thing is just gone. There will be no elections. Not by any standard that we've had them before. Whether the elections will actually happen or not, whether the elections will count or not, who can say? Those were her opinions. And of course, there was a lot of pushback from both Tim Pool himself and Michael Malice, because both of them said that that is absolutely insane to think that we're not going to have elections. Now, Michael Malice, of course, completely pushed back and said that we will have elections. It's not going to be any different. Tim Pool, of course, because he is the fence sitter, split the difference and said, well, we might have elections, but maybe it won't matter because of, things like happened in 2020, where they went through, they changed the rules, they circumvented the rules. They did everything they could to not break the rules, but still skew the election in the way they wanted it to go. And so in that way, if you wanted to think about it, then maybe we might not. But even he was skeptical. Now, interestingly enough, that was at the beginning of the week. Or was it the end of the last week? I don't remember exactly. A few days later, the Biden administration in the US formally indicted Donald Trump on several charges, but if we're going to be honest with ourselves and we're going to boil this down into its simplest terms, they are indicting Trump for conspiracy against the United States, sedition, and possibly treason. I say possibly treason because treason requires you to actually aid another enemy state against your own country. And that entirely depends on whether or not you believe Trump is a Russian agent or not. If you believe he's a Russian agent, then treason. If you don't believe he's a Russian agent, then just sedition. The charges actually don't matter, though. What does matter, especially for the purposes of today's conversation, is the fact that it is the sitting president, because this is a federal charge, directly indicting his primary and, at this point, really only rival. We do have a two-party system in the US. Despite the fact that we have many other parties, none of them in the history of the US have ever garnered enough strength to win, or to even really be in competition. And so, given that we have a two-party state, for one party to simply arrest, or attempt to arrest, the lead candidate of the other is to essentially assert one-party control over the nation. This is, of course, the crux of why it is such a significant endeavor that they are going after Donald Trump currently on all of these various indictments. It is the reduction of the US from a two-party competitive state to a single-party control state. And of course, as we talked about in a previous video when we discussed the idea of the population density and the what would happen if you were to remove things like the Electoral College, which would give one-party power again to the US. We discussed what happens when people lose any and all representation because you've just simply taken away the last slivers of power that they might have had. I believe it was Thomas Jefferson that said, those who make peaceful, peaceful revolution possible make violent revolution inevitable? Or something to those terms. Either way, removing the voice and power from the people is the surest way to foment insurrection in its finest. It would make January 6th look like a children's party. But the reason that I go over this right now is because with the indictment people are talking about this, and I do find that people seem to be getting themselves lost in the weeds. That is to say, everyone keeps looking for the war, rather than I think they should be looking for what they're trying to accomplish. See, a lot of people, I do believe, are under the mistaken impression that the second U.S. Civil War is going to look much like the first U.S. Civil War. And that's just not going to happen. The first U.S. Civil War was an anomaly. If you look at the history of civil wars throughout the world, none of them have looked like that, because most of them don't have standing armies that rise up against each other. The U.S. Civil War was less of a civil war, because a civil war would require that it would be inside of a single country. The U.S. was not a single country at that time. It was the United States of America, the North, and the Confederation of States, the South. Meaning that this was essentially no different than, say, if any other nation were to split, like say East Germany, West Germany, except instead of the Berlin Wall and the Soviets versus the Americans, it would have been just Germany splitting and then fighting itself until one side won and then reunified Germany. Actually, no, that's a bad analogy. You know what a better analogy is? Korea. That's actually a perfect analogy, because what happened with Korea? Korea split. Now, granted, that was also because of primarily the Soviets and the Americans, but that is literally one country fighting itself for complete domination of the other side so they can reunify it. After all, South Korea regards North Korea as a lost state. North Korea regards South Korea as a whole bunch of traitors that need to be, imprisoned and the nation reunified. Both sides want reunification. The question is just who's going to win and how are they going to win it? That's the American Civil War. Most other civil wars, such as the revolutions in France or the multiple Spanish civil wars that have happened over time, they're usually just pockets of insurrection inside the country who are fighting for control over said country. So when people look at the state of the US right now and they try to figure out what is the war going to look like, they look to the previous civil war and they fail to realize that it's not going to look anything like that. It's going to look more like the Spanish Civil Wars, where you have essentially terrorist groups going around the country trying to either terrify their opposition into hiding or simply eliminate them. The years of lead in Italy come to mind, where for like a decade, all social order in Italy basically broke down, at least at the political level, because people were no longer interested in debate or discussion. It was more about how many of the opposing party can you kill. Because if they don't have any party members left, then there's nobody left to oppose you. And that's primarily what I think the US is headed for right now. We've already seen shades of that. And I do think it's going to get worse. But while I do think it's going to get worse, I don't really want to get into the weeds of how it's going to get worse right now. Instead, I want to get into the end goal. Before I did any of this, I went to ChatGPT because I wanted to ask it a very broad question, one that philosophers have been asking themselves for centuries now. And that was very simply, why do we go to war? And the answer that it gave me is the list that you see up here on the screen, which I cannot read, and so I will have to actually pull up a copy of that because I can't read it on that screen. Where's the picture so I have something to read? Down in the R's. There it is. Okay, now I have something to read. So this is the list that it gave me, and I'm just going to go through these very quickly. I don't want to read them all out. So it's a list of 10 things, and it says, power and resources, ideology and beliefs, territorial disputes, security and defense, historical grudges, alliances and treaties, leadership and politics, miscommunication and miscalculations, economic factors, and then human psychology, which is things like fear, honor, pride, various things like that. And I looked at that long list and I said, that's a very long list, and I don't doubt any of them. They're all very good reasons. However, I think it's a little bit overly specific. And when I was thinking about this, and I thought about why is it that people go to war? What is it that people are trying to actually achieve? There was a couple on here that I thought that I could really kind of get rid of. For example, number 8, miscommunication and miscalculation. In other words, it's an accident. So there's no real goal there. You didn't intend to go to war. So we can get rid of number 8 entirely. We can ignore that one. But let's look at the rest of them. Power and resources, ideology, beliefs, territorial disputes. Let's look at a few of these in specific order. Power and resources. I think that one actually can be divided into two things. Because while both of them are absolutely valid, I do believe that's kind of the entirety of all wars. And they're not exactly the same either. So let's take the first one, power. We absolutely go to war for power. And if you want an example of that, I will very briefly just list off the current culture war that we're seeing throughout Western society, or the looming war between China and Taiwan. See, China does not gain anything from taking Taiwan economically. There's not exactly a ton of resources on the island of Taiwan. Why would they want to take it? It's very simple. They want power. They want control. They want authority, and to exercise that authority. The same thing is true of number 2, where it says ideology and beliefs. We can look to the history of the religious wars between the Abrahamic religions for that. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Whereas there is really nothing to be gained economically from many of these wars. They are simply wars of domination. The entire point is to subjugate your opponent and either convert them or control them. The same thing can be said of security and defense, obviously. Part of that, I would say, is the Soviet Union's multiple territorial wars, where they tried to grab as much land as possible. Leadership and politics, same thing. You're vying for control over a certain area. You're vying for power and authority. And of course, human psychology also kind of dovetails into that too, because, well, people often want power, they want control, they want to dominate those around them. And this is true of most people. Usually to much lesser degrees. We're not generally going to war, getting in fights with each other, but that doesn't change the fact that many people have these things to factor in. The other side of that, however, of course, is resources. We have, since the dawn of humanity, and even before then, when we were pre-human primates, we have often gone to war for territory and resources. And we do still see this today in groups like chimpanzees. Chimp wars are a growing thing, actually, as many of the primates are learning how to use things like tools. Either by just figuring it out themselves, or by seeing humans using tools and learning that they can do the same thing. Number 3 is territorial disputes. That falls under the same category as resources. Because why would you take the territory? Generally speaking, you want the territory because it has something you want. Either it has the resources you want, or maybe it has the people you want, and you're just trying to exercise power over them. Regardless, territorial dispute, it goes back into one of those two categories. Economic factors, number 9, again, goes right back to resources. You're taking it because maybe they have a trade hub. Maybe you're getting water access out of this. Maybe you're getting trade access to other countries that you didn't have before. Maybe they have significant resources that you can then exploit. We're talking lumber, mining, whatever it might be. Again, it factors back into resources. So when we look at all of the different reasons why different nations or people would go to war, we come back to two primary reasons. Either it's giving them power and control, or it's giving them resources that they need. And so with those two things in hand, I think we can now go back and we can apply these two things to the various conflicts that we see going on right now, and we can begin to ascertain exactly what people are attempting to accomplish with these conflicts. And by doing so, we can better understand and break down how to combat them and either diffuse or counter them entirely. So let's get into it. The first thing that I want to do is I want to come back to this website, which I have been on before. Of course, now it's obviously been updated because, well, the previous version wasn't exactly accurate anymore. Oh, and we lost our little furry dude in the corner. Oh well, I can't fix everything. So, I've had this one up from Politico before. This is tracking the Trump criminal cases. Obviously, before the hush money case and the classified documents case were on there, now, of course, we can add the January 6th insurrection. Which, if you're not familiar with it, we can scroll down just a little bit. The charges, according to this, 2 felony counts, including 1 conspiracy count of obstructing an official proceeding under 18 U.S.C. subsection 1512, 1 felony count of conspiracy to defraud the United States under 18 U.S.C. subsection 371, and 1 felony count of conspiracy against rights under 18 U.S.C. subsection 241. If you actually know what any of those are, congratulations, you are way smarter than I am. But the point is, basically, it's 2 cases of conspiracy against the U.S. government. And so with this, as I stated before, this is an official federal case. This is not being brought by any different district or town or state or whatever. This is coming directly from the United States government. This is coming directly from the Biden administration by direct order to his Department of Justice to go after Donald Trump. And as a matter of fact, we even have proof of this because it was required for Joe Biden, the current president of the United States, to sign off on the paperwork to send the Department of Justice after Donald Trump. In this case, it is literally an attempt by the current administration to hold power by stopping the previous administration from ever having a chance to compete. And why do I say this? Because again, we have to look at what is the end result of all the actions. I don't care about the actions themselves at this point. I want to look long term, and I want to say that whatever the actions they're taking, what are their goals? And for that, we have to make a few speculations, we have to make a few assumptions, and we have to dig through the bullshit a little bit. Because, of course, the Biden administration has come out and they have stated explicitly that this is by the Department of Justice. The only thing that they seek is justice. And perhaps this is true. However, at the same time that all this is going on, we also have multiple investigations against Joe Biden himself, and his son, and his immediate family, and his extended family, as we are coming out every single day with more and more and more revelations that the Bidens have been crooked for a long time. Whether it is making deals with foreign governments and taking bribes along the way, to just simply skirting the law because they have sufficient influence and power. These things all reflect very badly upon them, and while none of them have been criminally charged yet, it's all very bad for them in the long term in terms of their political aspirations. Now see, while they could be found not guilty in any court of law for all the various things that they've done, what the court cannot necessarily affect is the court of public opinion. And the court of public opinion right now is not in their favor. Despite the aggressive laundering of the news by the media apparatus, which is by and large slanted very much in their favor, the popularity and approval of the Biden administration continues to fall day after day. This is a problem because this is not something that they can just wave a wand or snap a finger and fix. Not very easily, anyway. They could, however, by doing so, they might actually invite more trouble than they already have now. I mean, that tends to happen when things like witnesses start disappearing. And so they're put into a hard position of how do they maintain their power, how do they maintain their position and their lifestyle if they cannot get ahead of the entire media apparatus right now that is not doing them any favors. The answer to that is to simply remove any obstacles. Now, for the long time, this has been something that has been frowned upon. It's been seen as somewhat dishonorable, disingenuous, and to a certain extent, evil. But we now live in a different era than what we used to. If you're looking to stay into power, the rules have changed. Now, we largely live by the rule of if you're not cheating, you're not trying. Whether that is outright cheating, breaking the rules, or subtly cheating by simply bending the rules. If you're not doing everything you can to win, then obviously you must not want to win very badly, or perhaps you're even sabotaging your own side. The idea of the fair fight is dead. And so what we have now is seemingly the attempt by the current administration to kneecap, handicap, and otherwise completely nullify his opponents to wage any kind of campaign at all. After all, if we look at the Republican primary contenders, of the many that we have, Trump is by far and away the greatest one that they have. He is the leader, and not by a small margin. When you get to second place behind Trump, you find a lot of characters that are very close together. But what happens here is that if you can take away the single figurehead of the party and you force the party to choose between multiples, you have a better chance to dilute their vote come the primary or the general election rather than the primary. After all, if you have one figure whom, 60 to 70% of the party supports, then come the general election, you can reliably expect 60 to 70% of all of those people to vote for your primary candidate. However, if your primary candidate only has roughly maybe 33% or less of the party's support, then come the general election, you can only realistically count on that 33%, plus some extras. You'll have some people who will vote for your primary candidates because they got the nomination, and of course you will also have some independent votes coming that direction, but you're all but guaranteed that they will never have sufficient support to really win a general election. And so this appears to be the plan. By simply going about and removing their political leader, you thereby cut the head off the snake, and you have secured yourself an easy win. Perhaps a permanent win even. Because if you can achieve sufficient power, well, as I stated in a previous lecture, what happens if not only do they manage to hold on to the presidency, what if they manage to, say, capture the legislation? The legislative branch, rather, again. Could they do things such as expanding the Supreme Court? Could they do things such as removing the Electoral College? Could they change the rules even further to make sure that they secure for themselves unlimited, unopposed future power? While we cannot prove this, obviously, this is why I stipulated that we need to make some assumptions, because it does seem to be that is the way they are going. So when we talk about civil war, we can discuss the various methods by which they want to do so, but the end goal is they want to have control. They want to have power. Because everything else they can simply derive from power. And given that power is the one thing that they want, then they can get it in a multitude of different ways. Currently, they are using lawfare. That is to say, legal lawfare, or legal warfare, rather. They're trying to tie up the other opponent in all kinds of different criminal cases and such to prevent him from waging any kind of campaign at all, and even hurting the rest of his party in the process. That being said, however, that should actual civil war break out, I don't see any reason why they would not be opposed to using kinetic warfare either. Or if they would just simply try to change the rules to make sure that their opponents are completely nullified, or to simply cheat as best they can behind the scenes. All of these various things are a war upon the other party. And while the methods may differ, the end case is the same. Now, before I get into any further analysis on that, I also want to get into something else. That is to say, if we're talking about power and we're talking about control, I want to come back and bring up the China-Taiwan situation. Now, I couldn't find any good article to bring up, so I just have a Google search here. But we're all familiar with the current situation between China and India. Or not China, I saw India on the page, so China and Taiwan. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Chinese history and need a quick recap, I can make it very simple for you. To make a long history very short, when the communists came into China and took over, the first thing that they wanted to do, much as, the communists do in every state that they take over, is they want to arrest and remove all of their competition. Because the last thing a communist wants is competition. No, a communist wants to have absolute power. And if that sounds familiar to what we were just discussing, perhaps that's not a coincidence. Anyway, after the communists took over China, they decided they were going to arrest the entire leadership of China. And so the entire leadership of China, knowing that they faced at best lifetime imprisonment and at worst summary execution in public, they fled. And they fled to the island nation of Taiwan. They set up their own nation there, they refused to be extradited, and they have been resisting China ever since. Of course, the nation of China regards them as being traitors and criminals, and they want to bring them back so that they can be served justice, if you can call anything that China does justice. And obviously the nation of Taiwan regards themselves as the true leadership of China and the actual state of China because, well, they were the leaders, and the communists simply held a coup. So that is the entire history of China and Taiwan, and right now they stand at the precipice of war because China has run out of patience, and they now state that they want Taiwan back. They don't even really care how they get it back. But they do care that they get them back at least in one piece so they can put the old leadership of China on display. But at this point, if they had to wipe out Taiwan entirely and simply remove that island from the map, I wouldn't put it past them. And that war is definitely coming. If we can even call it a war. It may not be much of a war. We'll have to see. Currently, China is in a very bad place right now. Their population is declining. If you hadn't noticed, the placeholder of the most populated nation in the world is no longer held by China. India is now on top. Yes, India's population is now larger than China's. And because of their previous attempts at population control, they have actually kind of screwed themselves. They are coming, well, the generation that was population controlled is now coming into the working age, and the previous working age is now aging out of the labor market, meaning that they are coming to a severe and rather extreme deficit in manpower. That is going to affect them both economically and militarily. which means that if they're going to make a move on Taiwan, they're going to have to do it very soon. Similarly, because of the way China's government works, they do have elections, and they do have some kind of parliamentary system, but either way, whether it's by age or whether it's by politics, President Xi is nearing the end of his term. So if he wants to go out as the leader who reunified China, he'll have to make his move soon. And what will that move be? Well, we don't know yet. Will it be military? Probably, but we can't be sure. It could also involve a crack team of Chinese soldiers infiltrating Taiwan and simply capturing them. It could mean just blowing them all up and saying, now there is no more old China, there is only new China, which will then be supplanted by China Zero and Vanilla China. But regardless of how they go about it, the end result is going to be the same. They want control over Taiwan. They want to dominate it, they want authority over it, and they want nobody left to question their authority over anything else. Much like what we see between the Republicans and Democrats in the US, we see something similar between China and Taiwan. And make no mistake, this is what China wants in general. China has, for its entire existence, believed that it is superior to the rest of the world. They have always believed that the Chinese people are superior to other people in the world, and they have always wanted domination over the entire world. For a long time, that was kept in check by infighting, and in modern times, it's kept in check by, well, the fact that China could not survive a world war if the entire world pointed all of its guns at them. Otherwise, they would try. And so we have that. Similarly, I do want to discuss something that is a bit different, but in the same vein, and that is the culture war. Now, I've discussed this at length, at extreme length, in these lectures. But the culture war that we find ourselves in is, by and large, very similar to what China wants. And as a matter of fact, maybe even the same thing. Because what seems to be the culture war in the US, in Canada, in Britain, Germany, France, in pretty much all Western countries does seem to be some kind of communist progressive uprising against all nations. And in our newly interconnected world, it means that all of these nations can be assaulted simultaneously. But we have seen this as people go after things like the LGBTQ, Rainbow Alliance, all of that, trying to push further power, further influence through various media apparatuses, through education, all of that. We have seen the rise of the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement, which has been trying to push basically every single kind of division into every single public space, whether that be government, whether that be law enforcement, whether that be labor, whether that be white collar, blue collar. We have seen it in everything, where they have pushed every single division we have a division for. Race, gender, sexuality, all of it. With the entire purpose of breaking down the foundations of the culture that already exists, and then supplanting it with their own. Now, why are they doing this? Because they want power, and they want control. Much as I said before with China, these people tend to be communists. Sometimes they'll call themselves socialists, sometimes they'll call themselves anarchists. You can really just throw them all in the same bucket, because while they may have a different name for what they want, and they may have their own descriptions for what they want, their end goals are always the same. Again, it's an all roads lead to Rome kind of thing. Either way, they want to have power over people. They want to have power over territory. Mostly it's the people, though. The territory just gives them the people to have power over. But they want to be able to control what people say. They want to be able to control what people print. They want to be able to control what people express. They want to control debate. They want to control discussion. They want to control what you're allowed to learn, what you're allowed to worship. They want control over every single facet of people's lives. And this is just their current way of doing it. In the previous Soviet Union, and through much of China, this was done through the lens of loyalty. After all, if you were not loyal to the state in power, then you were the other and you had to be gotten rid of. Loyalty doesn't really work anymore because in much of Western democracy we have done away with the virtue of loyalty. And so they have moved on to other divisions. Now instead of loyalty, it's racism. Instead of loyalty, it's sexism. Or some mislabeled phobia that they've come up with. Because a phobia, of course, is an irrational fear of, not an irrational hatred of. But they don't quite understand how that works. And so we have them trying to assert power through every avenue they can. Sometimes they go for legal ways. For instance, hate laws. Whether that be hate speech laws, hate crime laws, just hate laws in general, which stipulate that anything done to a person who is a different color, or a different gender, or a different ideology or religion, anything done to this person is no longer the crime that it was to begin with. It is now a different category of crime. And some things that are hate crimes were not even crimes to begin with. But they are now. So there are legal approaches. There are also the social approaches, where they use things like protest, mobbing, and harassment to control people. The cancel culture that we have discussed before. As I've stipulated in previous discussions, the entire purpose of cancel culture is to either correct somebody else's behavior or to remove them from your society in general. Because again, if you can cancel somebody from their job, if you can cancel somebody from their community, then they will have no money, no resources, no home, and thus no way to stay even if they wanted to. So they either bend the knee or they start walking. So we have cancel culture. Then, of course, we have subversion, which we see in media, we see in education, where they try to get to people who are literally incapable of making these higher decisions on their own, i.e., children, and they try to explain to them how their way of thinking is better and any other way of thinking is wrong. For the longest time, children were seen to be off limits because they did not have this capacity. If they didn't have the capacity to argue, then it was wrong to argue with them. But we've long since thrown that away now, and we are targeting the youngest. Indoctrinate them young, and you don't need to argue with them when they're old. I see that Flame is in. Hello, Flame. And so they have many approaches, but all of them go to the same root goal. The entire goal of the culture war is control. It's power, much as China wants with Taiwan, and much as the Democrats want with the Republicans. They want control over people. And Flame says good evening. No, it's good morning. We're on my time schedule right now. This is my podcast. It's not even a podcast. It's just a lecture. Can't call it that. But anyway, reasons for war. Control. And I think that I've given 3 very, very good examples of it. The other one, however, is, as I stated before, resources. Things. And for that, we're going to come back to this one. The Russo-Ukrainian War. Started back, according to this, says started back in 2014. Which, you know, I believe that. That was with the Russian annexation of Crimea. Now, this is about the only example that I can give right now of a modern resource war because we don't have a whole lot of resource wars going on currently. And a resource war is not exactly difficult to understand. You want things. Whether you want food, so maybe you're fighting for arable land, maybe you're fighting for water access for fishing, maybe you just need food for your people. And you're either fighting a war to take over the land so that you can farm it, or maybe you're fighting the war so that you can just take their food. Either way, it's not exactly difficult to understand. There's also territory. Maybe you don't need the food. Maybe you just want the area so that you have room to expand. Maybe you're developing. Maybe you've already got the resources you need. Maybe you have an excess of resources and you're looking for a place to develop. But rather than developing for another nation, where you might see limited or no returns on that, you could simply pour those resources into taking another nation, and then you can develop it as part of your own. Flame says every World War III scenario be like USA, EU, Russia, China fight for oil. I mean, that is true. Many wars have been fought for oil. And those, I do believe, are resource wars. A little bit different in that we were kind of securing trade routes for that. But no, it's a good example. The wars for resources are not hard to understand. You want things or you need things, and so you take them. This is, of course, the oldest form of warfare known to mankind. Before we were humans, before we were Homo sapiens, we had wars over territory. We wanted river access for water and fish. We wanted territory access for berries or game. We have been fighting territorial wars forever. And I mean, we even see this in animals. Not just primates, but even just regular animals. Animals control territories. A wolf pack has a territory. A cougar will have a territory. And they will mark their territory. They will chase other animals out of their territory. This is the oldest form of conflict known to all living things. Now, what I cannot say about this one is that there's an easy solution to it. We don't need this anymore. So when it comes to war, we look at the goals and we say, what are the goals of a particular war? What are they trying to accomplish? In the case of a resource war, we can say that perhaps they need these resources. Are they going about it the way that we wish they would go about it? No, obviously not. But we can at least understand it. And perhaps we can even head that one off by saying, you know, if a nation is starving, maybe trade is the answer. Could we do trade? Trade would be good. After all, maybe they have something of value to us, and we can give something of value to them. Sometimes that works, oftentimes it doesn't. But regardless, it's at least a possible solution. For wars of control, however, there are almost no solutions. Because when we look at wars for control, when we look at things like the indictment of Trump, and we say, is there a possible compromise here? The answer to this, of course, is no. There is not. After all, what could a compromise here possibly look like? So you have one side who wants Trump indicted on all these things. They want him convicted on all of them. And at bare minimum, they want him to be barred from ever holding a public office again. At the maximum, they would like to see him in prison for, I believe he's up to 666 years? I think I heard that somewhere. It's either 500 or 661 years. Basically, they want to give him a death sentence the long way around. Either way, just so they can secure their power. Of course, on the other side, what do Trump's supporters want? Well, that's very simple. They want all of the charges dropped, and they want him to run for president and hopefully win president again. So where's the compromise here? If there is a compromise here to be made, the compromise is simply this: drop the charges and have a proper election, and may the best person win. But that's not really much of a compromise now, is it? Not if you're looking to keep control. I need a drink.
Much better.
Kinda. Okay, much better. There we go. I can talk again. That's what I get for talking too much. So there's no real compromise here in this one, because to compromise would be to give up significant power over their political opponents, and it would be to put at risk all future endeavors by leaving the future results up to things that are just out of your control. If you're looking for control, the first thing that you don't do is give up control. And so there's no compromise here. Similarly, when we go to the Chinese-Taiwan issue, what would the compromise there be? Well, the compromise there would be, of course, to simply acknowledge that Taiwan is its own nation, maybe not the true China, but to simply stop trying to reunify. You don't have to take them, you don't have to acknowledge them. The compromise, of course, would simply be to leave them alone and move on. But that's not going to happen, because that would be to acknowledge their legitimacy in some way and to give them a modicum of power. And of course, what do you do if you're trying to gain power? You don't give it up. So we look at these end results, and now we have to ask ourselves a question. Not necessarily how will the war be fought, but we have to be goal-oriented here, and we have to say not just how will the war be fought, but how do we proactively stop them from doing said things. In some cases, this is easier than others. For example, in the case of the China and Taiwan issue, this is actually one of the easier ones, by simply making it unpalatable for China to ever be able to take Taiwan. We can head this one off at the pass and say that China is not allowed to do so. We've already done this by making alliances with Taiwan, military alliances, defensive alliances, where if China is to attack Taiwan, they will find themselves also at war with, say, the United States. We've also given Taiwan a significant amount of military support. We've given them arms, we've given them troops, we've given them many things to make them a much less palatable target for China. Which is probably the entire reason why this is still even an issue today. Because if they didn't have the defenses they have now, China would not have thought twice a long time ago. And when we discuss the culture war, obviously the answer to that one is simply speaking out against it and refusing to bend the knee to it. It means that when these people push their ideologies, you push back. When they tell you what you need to think or what you need to say, you say it anyway. When they try to put their indoctrination into your schools, you rip it back out. When they get into the media and they try to make movies that also push their agenda, you don't go see them. And this has been working to a rather amusing degree. The two greatest examples right now are, of course, Bud Light and Disney. Bud Light, if you haven't heard about that case, sponsored a trans person to kind of advertise their beer, flagship the beer. I don't know what the proper word would be. But either way, they got a rather insulting trans person to come and do this, and the result has been a massive, months-long boycott of Bud Light that has seen them not only fall from being the #1 beer in America to not even being in the top 10. They have lost, I don't even know how many billions at this point in valuation, and it has caused the loss of literally tens of thousands of jobs. And of course, those people who lost their jobs because of this have only one direction to point the finger, and that is back at the company who started this in the first place. The same thing is also true of Disney. Disney, who starting, 5 years ago, give or take, decided they were going to get political. And they began to push their diversity, equity, and inclusion into literally every single piece of media they had. The end result of this has been amusing, as Disney, I think, is on their 7th, 8th movie in a row to lose money. To the point where Disney is actually looking to sell off its assets, like many of the networks that they had bought only a few years ago. And as a matter of fact, they're even losing Mickey Mouse. Because if you haven't heard, the latest from Disney is that they now have the intention of shelving Mickey Mouse. Ostensibly, their reason is that they haven't used Mickey Mouse in anything for years, with his last film appearance being a Christmas special from something like 2009, I think. Perhaps even further back. I'm not entirely certain I remember. In reality, however, as we watch Disney lose money hand over fist, the copyright for Mickey Mouse is set to expire in 2024. Now, for those unfamiliar with copyright law, the copyright laws have also been called the Mickey Mouse Protection Laws, given that every single time Mickey Mouse came up for the public domain, Disney was always very commonly seen in Washington, D.C., and the copyright laws always seemed to be extended by a rather overwhelming vote to make sure that Mickey Mouse never entered the public domain. Of course, the answer there, much as we discussed earlier when we talked about the purpose of war being control, Disney was willing to go to largely any length to make sure that they retained control over the mouse. And where do they find themselves now? Well, now they're not even fighting for it. And one has to ask themselves the question of why. And while we cannot get a definitive answer to why, we can make a couple of assumptions. Those assumptions being that Disney has made so many disastrous moves financially in the past several years that perhaps their coffers have all run dry, and that because their coffers have run dry, they are no longer in a position to bribe or simply pay for the legislation to be put through to extend the copyright again and maintain their control over Mickey Mouse. And so, like a child who has been told by the adult in the room that they have to share their toys, now Disney is pouting and playing it off like, well, they don't want the mouse anymore. The mouse was dumb anyway, and they're glad that somebody else wants it instead. Whatever it takes to save even the slightest modicum of face. So many of these things can be fought, and they can be won against. But they have to be goal-oriented. You have to understand what is the goal of your opponent, and then you have to act to cut the legs out from under them before they can even begin to achieve it. This has largely been done already by groups like the culture warriors, the progressive communists and such, when they went through and they started attacking men. And they made it so that no matter what men did, their actions would be nullified. Whether a man acts or a man does not act, he's guilty either way. He's either guilty by not acting, in which case he either loses or he's punished for it, or if he acts, he can be accused of an entirely separate crime and punished that way. Men have already been largely nullified in this regard. So have many whites. And they're trying to do this even further. It's really funny because they even do this to their own. Once upon a time, when they were introducing things like the progressive stack, and they were giving different ratings to people based on how many different diverse categories they fell into, gay people tended to be one of them. Until eventually the umbrella became so large and people became so diverse that simply being gay was not enough anymore. And so those people were similarly nullified. It didn't matter if they spoke or didn't speak, they were regarded as being wrong either way. And so this is how you fight back, not by looking at the means that they're using and trying to counter what they're doing, by saying, well, this person is saying something I don't like, perhaps I should simply, say something back in the opposite way. But no, look at the goal that they're trying to achieve. If they're trying to achieve power over you in some way, ensure that they can't secure that power. If they're trying to pass laws that would make you subject to them, then petition against those laws while you still have the ability to. Raise your community up, get people together, and make sure that nobody can have authority over you, that you're not explicitly giving them. This means that you must be a little bit more insular, control your community, control your schools, know your neighbors. I've said that before. Know your neighbors. Be ready to take care of yourself. And don't let anybody else offer to take care of you. Because those who are taking care of you can have control over you. And once they have control over you, you can never get it back. This is how you defeat a war of control. You simply never let them have it in the first place. That's about all I really have to say on this subject. I had to say something because it was funny watching Tim Pool coming from one side of the aisle where he says, well, this can never happen, to now, after the Trump indictment, saying that, well, maybe. This idea that, maybe the U.S. won't have elections come in 2024. It sounds bizarre, it sounds outlandish, but when you realize what they're trying to do, it suddenly becomes a lot more viable that if they can simply neutralize and nullify their opponents in every single way, then they will have all the absolute power they could ever want. They can change rules, they can pass laws, they can do whatever. We're currently facing down multiple wars across the globe. If they remain in power, they haven't done anything to stop them yet. Would they do anything in the future to stop them? So if you don't want war, then the last thing you want is for these people to have even more power and control. And to see people, even people like Tim Pool, who claim to be very educated on these things, slowly waking up to what's really going on, it's interesting to watch. And so I hope that by doing this, I can also help other people to kind of wake up to this. sooner rather than later. But anyway, this is going to be a bit of a shorter lecture. We've only been here about an hour, but that's really all I had to say. So we're going to let this one go. We're going to let people go and enjoy their wonderful Saturday, unless you happen to live in either Texas, Arizona, Nevada, California, where, I mean, those people are literally just baking to death. What I'm saying is it's hot. So if you live in one of those places, good luck. You're going to need it. For everybody else, though, I'm just going to say enjoy your Saturday. Thank you for coming out to this. If you got anything out of the this lecture, then great. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon. That way you get notified of it. Flame says there was good music. Glad you think so. In fact, why don't we bring that guy back? Where's the little furry dude? Where's my furry dude? There he is. Hello, furry dude. So subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, that way you get notified of everything when it's coming out. There will not be a lecture next Saturday. I will not be here for that one. So, nothing on the next one. That being said, tomorrow we do still have the tabletop module that we're building. So if you want to be here for that, same time tomorrow. Same thing for next week. Same thing every Sunday. It's good. If you think that anybody else might get something out of this lecture, share the video with them. It's not one of my best lectures. I didn't have the greatest notes to go off of. But still, you can share it out. But otherwise, leave a like on the video, leave a comment down below, and I will see you next time for whatever happens to come. I don't actually have anything planned. I'll figure something out in the next 2 weeks. And until then, take care.